Centre, and she's a proud Tasmanian Aboriginal woman from Larapuna in the northern region of Lake Tasmania. So, Cinza, thank you very much for coming along, and would you please come up? Thanks. Ya is hello. So hello in my language. Kalingana is welcome. I welcome you all here this evening. I stand strong and proud in honour of my ancestors with every breath and step that I take. I acknowledged my country, Larapuna, which is in the north of the island. I acknowledge not only my country, but my ancestors, my grandfathers and my grandmothers. I also acknowledged your grandfathers and your grandmothers. I'm very fortunate to be who I am. My country is this country, Lutruwita. I am deeply connected to this country, and so is my family, has been cared by Lutruwita for hundreds and thousands of years, and still continues to this day. I acknowledge Punani and the healing medicines that run down from the mountain into Tintubiluminania. The mountain that has also cared for the Muanina and Muarimana people here of this country in Nipaluna for thousands of years, not surviving but thriving and still continuing to this day. My name is Cinza Mansell and I'm a proud Tasmanian Aboriginal woman. I stand here not only to acknowledge this evening and welcome you here all to this event, but also to acknowledge and represent my community. I would like to acknowledge my elders, those that have passed, those that are present, and those that are yet to come. We're very fortunate to have an extraordinary place, Lutruwita. This is a very strong country, and we are very strong peoples. I'd like to acknowledge your beating hearts and the work that you do, and also your presence here this evening. I believe that achievements are extremely wrong that people strive for. Our philosophy is that we are country and country is us. Therefore, we must care for country just as we care for ourselves. I'm a mother of 2 children, and I made the decision to raise my children on country, on the north of the island. Not many will understand that choice, but for them, that means that they know their country, and their country knows them. The strength and the knowledge and the wisdom that are within them from choosing to live and grow and to become beings on the country that we are deeply connected to has and always continue to impact them. But thank you all for having me. Nara Minatu. Thank you, Cinza, and it's rather marvellous to have that opportunity to hear
that deep connection to country so beautifully expressed. And I too want to say to you that we are really deeply saddened by the fact that when Lake Pedder was flooded, the Tasmanian Aboriginal people were not given an opportunity to survey the area, to survey the lake, and to look for those key elements of Aboriginal culture. And I give you our undertaking that when we restore the lake, as the waters come down, the Aboriginal community most certainly will be absolutely part of looking at what is emerging from the impoundment. So, we have just heard of that connection to country and that history over thousands and thousands of years, but this room is history for us too, the Lake Pedder community, because it was here in the Hobart Town Hall that the United Tasmania Group was first founded, and we're talking 50 years ago. And so it's wonderful that we have with us tonight Anna Reyonlds, who is the Lord Mayor of Hobart, to speak to us in this absolutely marvellous building that is so important to our own history. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Christine, and thank you so much, Cynthia, for the welcome to country. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we're meeting and acknowledge that they have survived invasion, dispossession, and continue to maintain their identity, culture, and rights. But yeah, thank you all for meeting here. And as Christine mentioned, this is a really important place, not just for this campaign, but for the people of Hobart and democracy in Hobart. It has been used ever since it was built in 1866 as a place for people to gather and to have their hearts and their minds opened to what is beyond the limits of the city of Hobart. It has been a really important part of our democracy, and yes, that meeting in 1970, that fiery meeting that has gone down in history, and it was a fiery meeting because it sparked such an important movement in terms of the environmental movement and also the Green Party in Australia and beyond. This was where Olegas Truchanas and Ralph Hope Johnston ran their slideshows, and I understand, I don't know how many exactly they had, but they had several slideshow meetings here, and I understand they were always packed out and really did inspire people so much in this campaign, or in the campaign to try and save the lake. So the connection to the Lake Pedder campaign and this place is really important. And cities around the world and in Australia are becoming really important partners in the climate and biodiversity emergency and in ecosystem restoration. And I know one of the things you're doing here tonight is also learning about the UN's decade on ecosystem restoration, which is a really important cause as well. And so Hobart did declare a climate and biodiversity emergency. We were the first capital city to do so last year. And we, as you all know, probably, as I think many of you would be residents of Hobart, we are a very biodiverse city, and we have a great new biodiversity action plan called Protecting Our Wild Heart. And it is a plan for looking after and restoring our biodiversity here in Hobart, our bushland, our grasslands, our alpine areas, our coastal zones. We've got 5 threatened habitats in the city of Hobart. We've got 10 threatened flora species and 11 threatened fauna species, and 5 of those threatened fauna species only live in the city of Hobart. And so the work that we do as a city within these city boundaries is really important for ecological restoration as well. And cities are full of people like yourselves that care not just about the habitat in your cities, but places, special places in Lutruwita like Lake Pedder. And your work obviously is greatly appreciated, both on those big picture restorations with this particular campaign, but also the work that happens in the city of Hobart. We have a bush care community that work to restore and reverse the ecological damage in the city of Hobart. As someone who's interested in sustainable cities, which I am a fan of the rewilding vision for the future. And I don't know how many of you are champions of that idea as well, but I think rewilding goes to the heart of this Lake Pedder campaign. And the rewilding movement is now growing all around the world and is part of this ecological restoration. And it is not only about bringing back nature in places that have been damaged by things like dams or deforestation, but it's also about bringing nature back to cities. And that's a really important part of the movement as well, because the more we can do to reconnect city dwellers to nature, it also builds resilience in our cities and restores the damage in our cities. And also, if we can coax more people back from the far-flung suburbs into our cities, and they may be a bit denser, but they're greener and more sustainable, then we've got even more space for that rewilding of some of those lands that have been degraded. And I think that's a really interesting idea as well. But thank you for inviting me to speak. I won't be able to stay for the rest of the evening, but I hope it's a really inspiring event for the movement and the campaign. I'm not sure, could be wrong, I'm not sure it's going to be quite as fiery as that night in 1972, but you might surprise me. But I do hope that regardless, tonight is a spark for your future work and future exciting projects to come. So thanks everyone.
She's absolutely right, of course, in terms of ecological restoration and rewilding as being critical, and of course Pedder is central to that. Being in the heart of our Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area, it will be wonderful to see it restored. I'm now going to introduce and invite to the stage Stephen Crump. He has written some music for us, which he is going to play in a moment as part of our whole campaign to restore Pedder. And I just want to acknowledge here that the arts is absolutely critical to any conservation campaign. It always has been, and we intend to make sure that it's a prominent part of this campaign to restore Lake Pedder, because it is about hearts and minds and connection to country, and the arts gives us a pathway that sometimes we need that in order to find that pathway. So Stephen, thank you very much.
First of all, I'd like to acknowledge this is beautiful sound of the country. Thank you. I mean, music is just such a universal gift. And point out that this song is dedicated to Christine.
That is a beautiful piece of music, and it's so contemplative in terms of we've used it as a backing track to slides and photographs and things, and it really is a lovely piece. So thank you, Steve. Much appreciated. Well, now to the basics of what we're here to do tonight is just to thank you, first of all, for your support of the Restore Pedder campaign over the last 12 months. It's been an interesting year with COVID for so many organisations trying to maintain momentum and at the same time keeping people safe. And we have been very lucky here in Tasmania compared with so many other places around the world, so I certainly acknowledge that. But we have had some very good events, and I wanted to just thank everybody who supported us with fundraising or in any other way. Tonight especially I wanted to thank the people who've donated wines, Blitzer Dixon, Stefano Lubiano, Nandroya, Mona, Marilla, Frogmore. Thank you very much to those sponsors. I'd also like to thank people who've made donations to the silent auction and the fundraiser, in particular Dick Friend, Hilary Bennell and Rob Brown. And I wanted to thank the management committee of the Restore Lake Pedder committee and also group, and also the young group of campaigners, as well as our secretary Tabitha Badger, our treasurer Simon Moreau, Todd Dudley, our deputy convener, and of course Jess Robbins, our project officer. So we're really very we wanted to spend this last year going through and doing as much research as possible so that we would have a really strong evidence base for the public campaign that we will be absolutely moving into next year. So as you're aware, the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration will be launched in March next year, and that gives us a tremendous opportunity coinciding with the 50th anniversary of the flooding of Lake Pedder to take Lake Pedder to become a flagship of the UN Decade. And that is the idea, to take this campaign global and bring it home, because after all, that's how we've won every conservation campaign in Tasmania over the years, because the global audience appreciates the value of wilderness in Tasmania in a way that many people in our own island, particularly in the government, don't. So that's the strategy. But in order to do that, we had to get our ducks in a row in terms of the evidence base, because it is etched on my mind the ridiculous campaign we had to go through when Helen G and Hillary were running the Pedder 2000 campaign, and we had the Tasmanian government supporting Nigel Forteeth, arguing that 4,000 platypus would die if we restored Lake Pedder. It was the first time that anyone had ever used a conservation argument against conservation, so we hadn't actually experienced that in terms of how to respond to it as a campaign. We're now accustomed to it, we get it all the time, but then we were not accustomed to it. And of course the problem was Nigel Forteeth used his position as a professor in aquaculture at the university to give credence to his views on platypus, which have nothing to do with aquaculture, but nevertheless, that's how it rolled out. And it was essentially that campaign, very, very heavily sponsored by the Tasmanian government and the Trout Fishing Association, that derailed the restoration of Pedder, even though we had a House of Representatives inquiry at the time which came out and said there was no reason why Pedder couldn't be restored except political will, effectively, and it wasn't seen as a priority of the day. So this time around, I wanted to be sure that we will not have any wild cards like that just thrown into the mix to derail the campaign. So as a result, we took Anita Wild, who's a restoration ecologist, and asked her to do a scoping study of all of the ecological issues around the restoration of Pedder, and her results were released relatively recently, and it's a very exciting story. So we know the beach is intact. We knew that in the mid-90s. We wanted to check it again. We sent a submersible down earlier this year and the beach is intact. So that's good. The dune system is intact. So those fundamentals of the beach are intact, but of course the impoundment is 242 square kilometres. The original lake was 10 square kilometres. So you're talking about a huge area beyond the lake that we're seeking to restore. So Anita looked at issues like, would it revegetate? What would it take to revegetate this large area? And the issue that came up there is that the peat soils are intact, and so long as we can maintain those peat soils being intact, then the vegetation restoration will be able to be achieved relatively easily, with only some areas needing to be reseeded. The issue then becomes how quickly or otherwise do you bring down the waters of the lake, because if you bring it down too fast and expose too large an area, it's exposed over a summer. If the peat soils dry out, then they disintegrate, and so you lose your potential for revegetation. There are also issues around erosion. How quickly do you bring the waters down? What happens with wave action and the beach and the dunes and so on? There are a whole lot of issues to weigh up in terms of how fast do you bring the water down and at what season do you bring it down. So for some things, a two-year draining of the lake would be a sensible way of going. For others, the faster the better. So we're going to have discussions around what is going to be the optimum that we can work through. But the good news is that it's essentially all there, all intact, all achievable as we expected it would be, but it's always worth actually having a scientific base. And in terms of platypus, I can tell you that it will be better for platypus because it's going to create a whole lot more of the riparian zones in which they prefer to live. So you'll have a lot of little creeks and streams in the area, and of course that gives them greater opportunity for habitat than around the lake. The other ridiculous thing, and as I said, it's etched on my mind, Nigel Forteith's scientific method was to go out in his trout fishing dinghy and he counted the number of platypus that surfaced around his boat, and then he extrapolated that across the whole 242 square kilometres, and that's how he came up with 4,000, which is the most ludicrous proposition. But anyway, the evidence is very clear that a restored Pedder, a restored serpentine valley, a restored riparian system will be much better for platypus. Interestingly also, Jamie Kirkpatrick is very well known and loved by all of us in the conservation community, has come out and commended us on the thoroughness of the investigation of the strong potential to restore Pedder as a globally outstanding, functioning native ecosystem. But Jamie also made the point, and I quote, "Lake Pedder, before being drowned, was recognised as a globally exceptional landform. Its restoration as a functioning system would add significant natural value to the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area." And that issue of geomorphology, which Kevin Kiernan, of course, is so renowned for, was never really taken into account in a serious way in the earlier campaigns, and certainly at the time that the lake was lost. It was not recognised as, but that landform there, in terms of geoconservation and global diversity of geoconservation, makes that area World Heritage of itself, quite regardless of the scenic values and all the other values. So it's pretty exciting that we have that example of glaciation, that is that geomorphological landform structure. So that's pretty exciting. In terms of the other, of course, some things never change. The hydro has never supported they supported the flooding of Pedder in the first place, and have never ever backed away from insisting that there is no business case whatsoever for the restoration of Lake Pedder. Every litre of water has dollar value to them, and any litre of water taken from Lake Pedder is a cost to them. But of course, as we know, the hydro does as it's told. The state government will direct the hydro to do whatever the state government wants it to do, but the government uses the hydro to advise it, and we just go round and round. But given that the hydro has taken instructions from the Tasmanian government to enter into offtake agreements with some of the wind farms, which are at a huge loss to the people of Tasmania, mega debt, 260 million debt that Hydro has taken on in order to subsidise some of those wind farms, in view of the fact that government has directed the Hydro to subsidise gas in Tasmania to the tune of 500,000 to $1 million a month. Then if the government chose to direct the Hydro to get on with the job of restoring Pedder, it can be done. So our job is political. It always has been. It has always been a matter of political will to get on with the restoration of Pedder, and I feel like there is a coming together of the circumstances with the 50-year anniversary, with the decade of ecosystem restoration, with the awareness of global warming and biodiversity emergencies. It's all coming together. The Australian government will have to respond to the UN decade. Interesting, Australia was not one of the 70 countries that backed the UN resolution. I'm sure that. I know you'd be shocked to hear that. But yes, I'm telling you something, that yes, Australia didn't back the resolution, it wasn't a signatory to it, but nevertheless it passed the UN General Assembly last year, and so Australia will be expected to do something for the UN decade. So the restoration of Pedder, because it's already in a World Heritage Area, it has global significance, it's of outstanding value to humankind, and it's outstanding universal value to humankind. Therefore, it's a really an excellent project for the federal government to take on. So our job is now political will coming into state and federal elections. And we now, as I said, have spent this year getting the database of all the evidence that we need. We have the ecological report, we have the legal report, which goes through all the regulatory and legislative changes we need. We're looking at an engineering study to look at the dams and how they might be removed or modified if they're not removed totally, so that you look at issues like how you would control the flow down the Huon River, for example. There's a whole lot of issues that still need to be looked at, but that issue of energy economics is going to be the key one again, as always. And I certainly would argue that we can easily replace the energy that is stored in Lake Pedder through energy efficiency, if we chose to go that way, or through some other renewable energy generation asset. So it is certainly achievable. It's a question of insisting that the government actually directs them to do it. In terms of rewriting this history of destruction, I think the really compelling argument for the restoration of Pedder is hope. You know, hope that we can actually turn things around. We have a whole generation of young people who have known nothing but losses on climate, on biodiversity, on conservation. All they see ahead of them is loss. And so if we can actually give them the opportunity to be hands-on involved with a project that actually restores a World Heritage Area, takes it back to it won't be exactly as it was, that is an impossibility, especially given global warming. But if we can take it back to being a functioning ecosystem so that it can evolve in an effective manner, then that is what restoration actually means, to be able to do that. So it's a pretty exciting prospect, and we've got a lot of young people very keen. Earlier this year, to our great surprise, I never have much optimism, I suppose, when it comes to the media. But nevertheless, earlier this year we got a phone call from Channel 10's The Project saying they'd quite like to do a little piece on Pedder. So Bob and I thought, well, what the heck, let's do it, you never know. And they did a really outstanding job. So commercial television did come to our assistance on this, and so Jess is just going to play the project piece for any of you who didn't see it. Part of this whole thing with the hydro is they are fixated on building Marinus and Battery of the Nation, and that is one of the reasons why they are so opposed to the restoration of Pedder. And so I commissioned a report this year from the Bob Brown Foundation, from the Victorian Energy Policy Centre, looking at Will Marinus and Battery of the Nation reduce emissions? Is it necessary for the mainland to get to 100% renewable energy, and is it economically viable? That report came back saying no, the mainland does not need it to get to 100% renewable energy. No, it won't bring down emissions, and it is certainly not economically viable because it's already been leapfrogged by batteries. That the main argument that they are using is that when we get 60 or 70% penetration of renewables, wind and solar, into the national electricity market, you're going to need Tas Hydro to balance the system. Bruce's argument from the Victorian Energy Policy Centre is no, you won't, because by that time, if you need 12 hours of storage, you'll have it with batteries. And just in the last fortnight, there's been an explosion of batteries. You know, practically every time you pick up the paper, Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia are all building batteries. If you're interested in that report, it's a very good report, and we've certainly circulated it to all the decision-making bodies, but it's on the Bob Brown Foundation website, just entitled Project Marinus and Battery of the Nation, Wrong Way Turned Back. So please have a look at it because it's a crucial issue in terms of the restoration of Pedder. Just before I introduce Tabitha, I just wanted to acknowledge that Senator Peter Wilson has joined us here tonight, and the Greens are big supporters of the restoration of Pedder, so I'm delighted to hear that. I now like to introduce Tabitha Badger. Tabitha is a fantastic young Tasmanian who is committed to looking after our island home. She lives on the east coast at Frasernaye. She has done a huge amount of volunteer work for us, assisting us in promoting the Pedder campaign on social media, being part of the Paddle for Pedder. In fact, anything we need doing, she has been there helping us. So I'd like to introduce Tabitha.
It has been incredible to witness the enthusiasm of a generation who are motivated to restore Lake Pedder, a lake that we've only ever known to be this imposing, vast inland sea, which is completely converse to the unique, quaint, ancient character of the southwest wilderness. We're a generation who have seen more destruction of the natural world than any other, and we find ourselves inheriting a climate and biodiversity crisis. As a photographer, capturing our landscapes has become a feat of documentation of wild places whose future hangs in the balance, rather than a celebration of their existence. You spend months setting up the perfect shot in the southwest, only to go back there on what should be the perfect day for the perfect photo, and find the entire place has been decimated and clear-felled, and there is nothing left. This debate on forestry, it seems so repetitive. In 1946, the Country Women's Association advocated for a halt to logging in the southern forests, arguing that logging was increasing the intensity of bushfires, and that the entire southwest should be protected in perpetuity. And it's astonishing that today we're still having that exact same debate. We're in desperate need of a bold campaign which can reverse this Tasmanian way of destroying our wild places, the endless industrial pursuits. And in the restoration of Lake Pedder, we have that opportunity. To paraphrase Max Angus, who put this far more eloquently than I will, that Lake Pedder has been there in the path of the Roaring Forties for thousands of years, and it will take a lot more than putting 15 to 14 metres of water over the top to destroy it. And that one day, when there is solar and energy of other kinds of wind power, such as what we're seeing today, the time will come when the Pedder impoundment is as defunct as the water wheel and we can restore it. And now is that time. We are a generation who are opportunely positioned to meet and work alongside those who helped to advocated to save the lake originally, who have relentlessly fought over the years to keep that memory alive. And we're empowered with technology to keep people, to be informed and to hold people accountable. If there's scare campaigns such as in 1972 when the HEC tried to tell Tasmanians if Lake Pedder was safe, their power prices would go up. Today, we have all of that information in our hands, on our phones, and we can readily available to access that. And the involvement of this generation, who never got to see the subliminal original Lake Pedder, shows that its value is unquantifiable and it extends beyond the aesthetic values. So the restoration of Lake Pedder alone cannot solve climate change, unfortunately. But in this dire time, we desperately need a bold movement to inspire and scale up ecological restoration, not just in Tasmania, but across the globe. The restoration of Lake Pedder, the heart of the southwest wilderness in Tasmania, has the power to be that pivotal movement.
Thanks, Tabitha. And at a time when we need to give young people hope and to get them involved in conservation, it's perfect in terms of the restoration of Lake Pedder to have this generation so keen, and of course huge opportunities for people to get out in the bush and help with the restoration. It will be terrific for the Derwent Valley, as well as Todd Dudley, our Deputy Convenor, has done a lot of restoration on degraded forests in the northeast, has found that a lot of the people who were involved in the logging industry are very keen to be involved in the restoration of native forests, because they're the ones with the machinery and the know-how. And when you educate them about what are the native species and what are the values and what are the weeds and so on, they're actually quite keen, because what they love to do is work in the bush. And so I think the same will be said of the Derwent Valley once we get started on this. It's a potential for, I think restoration has such a potential for cultural shift. So that's another reason for getting involved in the campaign. But at this point, I'd like to thank you again for coming tonight, and especially those of you who've been with this campaign since the beginning for 50 years. But I'm not putting Bob quite in that category, but almost. And so I'd like to introduce Bob Brown, who has been familiar with this campaign to restore Lake Pedder for 50 years. And it's wonderful to have you here again, Bob. Thank you.
This campaign to restore Lake Pedder, the only question we have to ask is when, and the if has gone. And towards that end, we've had a silent auction tonight, and I'm going to ask Jess to come up to say who got what in aid of restoring Lake Pedder. Thank you, Jess.
Thank you so much, Bob. And thank you everyone to bidding tonight and for coming along and just having a wonderful night. I'm really happy to announce that the winners of the Ljubljana Pinot, so this will be one bottle each, is Rob Giblin, Jessica Adams and Rosie Barry. So thank you very much. The Gluckster Dixon Pinot one is Shane Hogue, Paul Thomas, I think you might know him, Jessica Adams as well. There's also the Gluckster Dixon 2019, so 2 bottles to Amanda Sully and 1 to Peter Jones. So thank you very much. Now we have very exciting, the 3-pack of wine from Frogmore Creek goes to Rosie Barry, who's donated $111. And that's going to Steve Crump, our amazing pianist, for $175. We then have the Ralph Hope Johnston photograph on the left-hand side, which is going to Peter Blackwell for a generous donation of $250. And lastly, the Ralph Hope Johnson on the right is going to John Fry for the generous donation of $300. So thank you.
I know Ralph Hope Johnson would be delighted with that. He went to school at Cygnet, and he rented a room up in the current Wilderness Society building. The smallest room upstairs was his. It was a bed and breakfast in those days when he went to college. Anyway, he presented Olegas the slides of those 8 presentations here in the Town Hall in the late 60s, early 70s, and that was the world's first, so far as we know, such technology in visual presentation of the pictures being taken at the time, of course, freshly in colour. What we all want to see, though, in colour and 3 dimensions is Lake Pedder. I might say, since Mansell's gave us such a terrific welcome here earlier tonight, and one of the things that might come back to us before Pedder is restored is the Indigenous, or an Indigenous name for it. The Claudio Corso used to say to me, remember him, he owned Marilla and was a great supporter of the arts as well as the environment. He used to say, I can't understand such a beautiful lake named after the hanging judge of Hobart, as it was. So who knows? But first we need to restore it, and it's pretty amazing that here we've got the biggest Pedder meeting in the Town Hall since 1973. Isn't that great? And I wonder how many folk here would join in the next few years. You know, there was little street marches, some hundreds of people for Lake Pedder, but who'd be happy to join a street march to restore Lake Pedder in the coming years? Well, look at that. Ready, set, go. And wasn't it marvellous that the project took that up? And Christine's notification to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, there is great global interest. For example, David Suzuki, our old friend Bellamy died earlier this year, but David Suzuki, who's now 85, who gave a fiery speech here some 10 years ago, wants to be kept informed about Pedder and the restoration of Pedder. It is of global interest, and it's coming. So you can be assured about that. Buying some of those wonderful Restore Pedder stickers, badges, pieces to sew onto your sleeve. I'm very good at that, aren't I, Paul? Or do you iron them on? You iron them on.
How good are you at that?
Anyway, they're up there, and they're great Christmas gifts. For anybody you know who likes the outdoor, just present it to them. There's a conversation straight away. And going to the Restore Pedder website and watching events coming up like this, it is just growing. You can feel this organic growth that's occurring in this great campaign. And everybody's going to be part of it when it's finished. But that's the way things go. Donations are incredibly important. The money that came in that enabled these studies on energy and on the wherewithal needed to restore Lake Pedder and much more has really given the campaign the strength and ability to be able to stand and eyeball anybody in saying this is a great project, this is a good one. And as Christine has said a couple of times, it's so enormously positive and optimistic, and as Tabitha was pointing out, in a world where so much destruction is occurring. And again, it's set to put Tassie on the map. We have a little bit of conversion of a few of the politicians. Peter's leading the way in that respect, but we don't have the majority yet, but that's coming. So donations are incredibly important, and please feel free, if you want to make a Christmas gift for somebody, just put a card under the tree and say, I gave you $250 to restore Lake Pedder because I knew you'd feel good about that. So much more to do, so many exciting things coming down the line. It's a great campaign. It just feels so good. And I think the critics are on the back foot on this one. It's all go for Restore Pedder. Jess has done a great job managing the campaign. Tabitha and Todd and so many others have been brilliant, and Dick giving a huge donation, made part of this assembly of knowledge viable. And that's just the start. It is getting bigger. So thanks for being here. And the inspiration of the young joining in this campaign is phenomenal for us older folk. I don't think there's anybody here as old as me, but for us older folk who don't need to see Lake Pedder restored, much as we'd love to. We just need to know it's going to happen, and it is going to happen. So there's a smile on the face for anybody who wants to think about things going right for a change. So, as Donald Trump goes out, the decade of restoration comes in. What a great part.
Thanks, Bob, and thank you everyone for coming along. If you're one of the prize winners, please go down to Amanda, who has the prizes down the back. Please renew your membership to Restore Pedder. As Bob said, give membership to somebody, alert people to our newsletter, to our lists, because it's really important that we spread the word as quickly and as broadly as we can. But thank you again for being here,